Bene, allora bentornati. Allora è un piacere per me presentare Barbara Elisabetta BORG che insegna archeologia qui alla scuola normale, è un settore nel quale tra l'altro la scuola normale ha fortissime tradizioni, quindi sarà un piacere sentirla. Non ho il titolo, ma ce lo dirà direttamente lei. Grazie.
Grazie e benvenuti a tutte e tutti. Mi potete sentire? Sì, anche al fondo. Benissimo. Io oggi vorrei parlare un po' del mio corso che ho fatto quest'anno alla scuola per darvi un'idea del tipo di corsi che io offro. E quest'anno il mio corso aveva il tema delle tombe e usanze funerarie del mondo romano. E facciamo così. E non voglio parlare a lungo tempo dell'organizzazione del corso, ma solo parlare di alcune idee di base, diciamo. Quindi i miei corsi sono sempre organizzato in un modo in cui durante le lezioni parlo delle cose di base, dell'informazione che dobbiamo avere per parlare delle cose interessanti e importanti. Per esempio, in quest'anno ho parlato dei tipi di tombe, come si può identificarli, quali sono le regioni in cui esistevano, come si può datare queste tombe, e non solo gli edifici, ma anche le varie usanze funerarie, l'incinerazione, l'inumazione, il trattamento del corpo del defunto, anche degli analisi scientifici che si può fare sui scheletri per capire meglio, per esempio, la dieta delle persone o lo stato della salute degli individui, del lavoro che hanno fatto. Sono tutti aspetti della vita antica che si può ricostruire studiando le tombe e anche i resti umani. E quindi una parte del mio corso è stato dedicato a un'introduzione a tutte queste cose di base. Ma poi ho anche parlato, diciamo, per forse 60% del corso che costituisce di lezioni frontali più o meno, con qualche discussione anche, e anche seminari che sono basati sulle discussioni in gruppo, con una partecipazione attiva delle studenti dove discutiamo le cose, tutto basato sulla ricerca recente, sulle cose che non trovate in questi libri fondamentali, ma le cose che sono anche un po' discusso per la metodologia, per i risultati, e quindi la ricerca cutting edge, la ricerca più recente, e anche ricerca sulle domande su cui non possono concordare tutti i ricercatori, perché credo che la cosa più importante per uno studio all'università non è l'accumulazione di knowledge, della conoscenza dei fatti. Ovviamente abbiamo bisogno anche di questo, perché altrettanto non possiamo pensare delle cose su una base scientifica, ma la cosa più importante secondo me è imparare come si può approcciare un problema, come si può approcciare in modo metodologico le domande aperte, le cose interessanti ma magari un po' enigmatico. Come si approccia queste cose? Essenzialmente, che cosa significa essere un ricercatore o una ricercatrice? Quindi questo nei miei corsi è molto interessante e quindi importante, e quindi focalizzo tanto sulle varie metodologie, ma anche e studio il materiale archeologico non solo dal punto di vista delle tipologie, delle datazioni e tutto questo, ma ultimamente come materiale che ci dice qualcosa della società antica, delle persone dell'antichità, come hanno vissuto, che cosa hanno pensato, quali sono le cose su cui sono stati preoccupati, cose che hanno goduto. Il mio italiano non è ancora perfetto, purtroppo. Quindi l'ultimo interesse per me è usare la cultura materiale per capire meglio la cultura antica. E questo probabilmente per voi è un po' astratto, ma vorrei esemplificare questa idea con una lezione che ho fatto in questo anno sulle catacombe di Roma. Ovviamente le catacombe sono, il loro principio è molto ben conosciuto, ma di solito volevo cambiare in inglese, anche perché io faccio le mie lezioni in inglese per offrire l'opportunità ai nostri allievi di un'esperienza un po' internazionale, mentre i seminari dove discutiamo le testi e le cose lo faccio in italiano. And so I will switch to English for this lecture on the catacombs. And I was about to say, vorrei invitarvi di chiedermi se non capite il mio inglese. Mi potete interrompere in qualsiasi momento, perché per me è importante che voi capite cosa dico, e quindi posso provare a ripetere il mio pensiero anche in italiano se non capite bene la versione inglese, va bene? Ok. You may be a bit surprised to find me talking about catacombs, and let's go to this slide here, where you have a view into one of these catacombs on the left-hand. Oh, there. On the left-hand side, so this is, one gallery, what it looks like. And you may find that a little bit surprising that I'm talking about this because, the Scuola Normale does not do theology as far as I'm aware. And I am a classical archaeologist, but what I would like to discuss with you today is that I believe that it is a misinterpretation of the catacombs that they are only Christian, but that they fully belong to the culture of the 3rd century AD Rome. Now, these catacombs, this is about what they look like. They are very long galleries, and their walls are pierced with these elongated shafts in which the bodies of the deceased were placed, and then they were normally closed with either normal tiles, sometimes with marble slabs, but essentially, at least in the 3rd century, they were relatively simple types of burials. And in this slide here on the right, you certainly can't read the names that have been underlined here, but you will be able to make out their distribution. So there are they all indicate the location of catacombs, and you can see that there were quite a lot around Rome. This is the line of the Aurelian Wall, so the late antique city wall of Rome that still exists, and if you have been there, you will have noticed it. And so outside these city walls, there are all these various catacombs. And I'm showing you here the plan of just one of them, the catacomb of Domitilla. Who has visited a catacomb in the past? Anyone? Few people have, majority not. Okay. So this is the Domitilla, the plan of just one level of the Domitilla catacomb, which is the largest of the Roman catacombs, and it has a total of 9 kilometers of galleries underground. So at the end of it, at the end of the 4th century AD, when it stopped being used and extended, had about 9 kilometers of galleries. So enormous structures. There were more that also had, several kilometers of galleries inside. They all originated in various smaller underground establishments that were mostly created at the beginning of the 3rd century. So, let's say around 200 AD 200. It is still unknown why suddenly this boom in burial forms underground came into existence. It is possible that this happened due to climate change, so that the underground of Rome became drier, and it was therefore possible to dig galleries into the tuff without hitting the water line underground. But this is still something to be researched, to be explored. And so, as I said, it started with very small establishment like this one here, or this system of a limited number of galleries. I have marked the entrances here in the overall plan of the Domitilla catacomb, and you can see then from there the catacomb extended to end up being that enormous establishment at the end of the 4th century. Now, I said already that I believe that, contrary to what many researchers believe, that the Roman catacombs were not created, invented for the burial of Christians who had to hide underground or who wanted to be buried in their Christian community, separate from other people. So this is the traditional explanation. But that the catacombs were actually used by a very mixed group of people for burial. I am not the first to have proposed this. There were others who have argued this in a number of different ways. For instance, the ancient historian John Bodell, a specialist in epigraphy, he has offered some calculations. So in the first step of his argument, he said, if the Christians died at the same rate as non-Christians, which is very likely because they all lived together under the same circumstances, then in the 3rd century, around 234,000, oops, there is 1 0 too many, sorry, 234,000 Christians died in the 3rd century. The pre-Constantinian catacombs, oops, sorry, that is going too fast. So the parts of the catacombs that were established in the 3rd century contained about 41,000 loculi. So we call loculi these slots in the walls in which the bodies were buried. This then took him to the next step. He observed, and this is an established figure, that from all of Rome, from the whole history of Rome in the imperial period, we have archaeological remains of one sort or another of about 1.5%. If the catacombs would have been used for Christians only, based on these figures here, we would know the burial place and the graves of Christians of 18% of them. So a huge discrepancy. And in this case, because there are very few other tombs known from the 3rd century, we would only know of about 0.001% of non-Christian tombs. And this, he said, is a discrepancy that is difficult to explain. It is very unlikely that we know nothing about the burial of non-Christians, and we have the remains of graves of such a high percentage of Christians. And so the hypothesis that he came up with was that the catacombs were not used by Christians only. And indeed, there are some indications within some catacombs as well that they were used by a mixed group of patrons. I am showing you here the catacomb on Via Dino Compagni, which one can visit, but only with a special permission. It's also called the Hypogeum of Vibia, and you see a plan of the catacomb here on the left. So this is a 4th century establishment where we have already little cubicula, little chambers that branch off from these galleries, some actually quite large. And this is one view into this chamber. And indeed, we have a number of Christian images, as we would expect. Can anyone identify this one here? Can anyone guess what this story, the biblical story, might be? Anyone? We see a man in the middle and 2 animals by his side, which are what kinds of animals do you think? The ones in the front possibly can... Give it a try. Lions, yes. And which biblical... Yes? Yes, Daniel in the lion's den, absolutely. And by the way, if you want to respond in Italian, that's absolutely fine. So we have the story of Daniel there. Then here on the wall, we have a figure who is pointing with this rod at a tomb with a kind of mummy-like wrapped figure inside. So that is the resurrection of Lazarus. So there are a number of Christian themes depicted. Yeah, there you have the detail on the right. Here we have Christ who chases out of the temple all the people that don't belong there, the money lenders and those guys. So a number of Christian images. But then, if we so this is the chapel here at the very end. Yeah, this is the chamber at the very end. You see Daniel in the lion den there. But then we have something here, and that looks quite different. Here we have a figure who is holding a club, yes, and then there is also another figure. You can't see that she is female on the ground, and there is a bow and a quiver. Any idea who that might be? Heracles, yes, who has killed the Amazon. So we have, in this same catacomb, we have one chamber with Christian images and another chamber with other images. So this is a detail of Heracles and the Amazon. And in fact, in this cubiculum, in this part here, so that's, this one here, there are several mythological images, and we don't have to go through all of them. Most of them are about the deeds of Heracles. And normally you wouldn't think that this is a Christian topic. And so this could be seen as a very nice example of a mixed establishment, a mixed system of galleries where people of different religious beliefs have been buried. This is another scene from the same Hypogeum where we see a doctor explaining a dissection, maybe, of a dead body to his disciples, so a teaching scene. So a very mixed kind of user group. There is also in the literary sources, in the church fathers of the early days, relatively little evidence that the Christian church was very concerned of Christians being buried separately. What I would like to talk about today is a bit about my own research on the topic, which approaches things from an archaeological point of view, from a study of the archaeology of the catacombs, and which I believe confirms some of the doubts that have been issued by John Bodell and other scholars. So the first thing to acknowledge is that there were catacombs of Christians already at the very start of the 3rd century. There can be no doubt. And one example is this one here, the so-called Area 1 of the San Callisto catacomb. And you see a plan of the late phase of the catacomb here, another relatively large one, like the Domitilla one on Via Appia, and you can go and visit. And this area here, where you see this regular sort of grid system of galleries, This is the part that is called Area 1 by Skoll. That's a scholarly name, obviously, not an ancient terminology. And this has been very well researched, and we can observe very nicely how that developed over time. We can also see that the development occurred within a relatively small area that has been bordered by a street and also by walls. So it was a small a relatively small plot compared with the total area here of the catacomb. A limited, let's say, limited area in which at the first stage, around 200, there were 2 galleries with 2 side galleries on this one established within this plot. Then this system was extended by excavating further galleries, always within this same plot of land, to increase the number of loculi and the number of graves. Essentially, this is a 3rd stage, which is reached around 230, where we can also see that just going underneath this road, which may have been a private road, there are 3 cubicula, 3 chambers built of the type that we have already seen. And this is a view inside this one, which is called A3, and a detail of another biblical scene. So there are several biblical scenes in this place here. We have the story from the Old Testament. Anyone knows what that is? Jonah, yes, that's the story of Jonah, who is being spat out from the sea monster. So, and these 3 all have paintings with biblical scenes. So that confirms that we are looking at least in this part, at a Christian burial site. And also at the same time, another 2 further large cubicula are being installed. One is a double one, which is often reconstructed in this way. This is a little bit dubious, but it is clear from inscriptions that were found within the gallery system that the popes, 9 popes of the 3rd century, were buried in this gallery system. And that suggests very strongly, in particular because it is such a limited, enclosed space, that this was indeed a Christian foundation. And we do have some literary sources which tell us that a certain Calixtus, who was asked by Pope Zephyrinus, that's him, around 200 to establish a koimeterion, which, this term is linked to our term cemetery or cimitero. It's a Greek term, but it's essentially what we still use today as a term. And because the name of this catacomb has always been the Catacomb of Calixtus or the Cemetery of Calixtus, it is pretty certain that this textual reference refers to this Area 1. Now, what we see here is not the sprawling catacombs that extend in all directions widely and in really large numbers. But this whole gallery system, once it was filled up, had only 1,100 burials. And I didn't calculate the meters of the galleries, unfortunately, but as you can see, this is 50, This is 50 meters, so much, much, much smaller than these large catacombs. And indeed, if one looks for other early small catacombs that are relatively certainly Christian establishments, we find that they are all established within relatively small plots of land. And this actually fits very nicely with what we know from written sources, Christian written sources, about about benefactors who gave land or money to the church to support the church or to support the poor. They are not giving huge plots of land or real estate, but limited plots of land in which the Christians could then establish their little cemeteries underground, also above ground. There are normally also graves above ground of the catacombs. And so these are a few further examples, and then only in the 4th century, from Constantine onwards, the catacombs really expanded into these large systems, which we know so very well. So it seems that it is these limited plots that occasionally were foundations by and for Christians. Now, if we look at one of the larger catacombs, we can also find further evidence that suggests that the large establishments were actually founded for a different group of people, and which may have included Christians, but also lots of other people. And a wonderful example is the catacomb of Praetextatus, again on Via Appia. So this very straight line here, that's a Google Earth image, is the Via Appia Antica. And here, this is the location roughly at the 2nd mile of the Via Appia, the location of the catacomb. This is the plan of the catacomb in the 4th century. And again, we can follow, thanks to the publication of Lucrezia Spera, we can follow the development of this catacomb chronologically through time. And here it is very interesting that it originated in a water tunnel, in a very large, long cistern underground, which was used for collecting water to use for agricultural purposes in the area. That must have fallen dry at some point, and the first burials were established along the main channel of this cistern. Some entrances into cubicula were beautifully decorated, as you can see in these drawings. After a few decades, this first gallery was then extended in a very systematic way, so with galleries that were carefully planned and regularly laid out in this direction here, at a different level, obviously, and also in this part over here. And here we have a first indication that that this extension here may have been used not only for Christians but for other people as well, because a sarcophagus has been found with the name of the deceased inscribed. So this is just a close-up of one of the panels of the sarcophagus, where you see the deceased with his portrait, you know, a bit of a grumpy old man with his portrait, set on the youthful, beautiful body of the god Dionysus, who is accompanied by a satire. And so this is not exactly what we would imagine a Christian person, how a Christian person would present themselves in their burial monument, in their sarcophagus. But it gets even more interesting. According to ancient property law, the person who owned a plot of land above ground owned also the air above and the ground below. So if you buy a plot of land, you actually buy the whole cube of, three-dimensional extension. And so we can conclude that the person or the group who owned the catacombs underneath the ground was the same person as the person who owned the ground above. So from that point of view, it really matters who was buried above ground. And above ground, there have been richer graves, which were also decorated with inscriptions. And these inscriptions, every now and then, well, they have names, and these people, these individuals, we do not know from other sources, but sometimes they tell us a little bit more about themselves. And these are just two examples of inscriptions, fragmentary though they are, who tell us that they featured on the facade of a tomb, each on a different tomb, that was built by a chef, by a cook, by a head cook, and also by a head cook that was working in the palaces of the Roman emperor. And I have translated the inscription here, so the dedication to the spirits of the dead, dies manibus, and then it says, Marcus Aurelius Hermes, that's the guy who built the tomb, freedman of Augustus, so he was a former slave of the emperor who was then set free. Head cook, archimagios is the terminus that is used, so head cook, made this tomb while alive for himself and his brothers, and they are named, and for his freedmen and freedwomen and their offspring, and to those whom I gave to our Lord, that is the emperor. So these are his children who are still slaves of the emperor because they have not been set free. And to Valeria Hermione, my wife, and to Hedulus, her fellow freedmen, so they're all freed people, decurion of the cooks. So what is happening there? Okay. Decurion of the cooks. From this and other documents, we know that the imperial household, which was, of course, enormous with thousands of staff, was organized a little bit like the military in decurii, so in smaller groups, and these groups had heads who organized the work and who were a bit more powerful than the rest. And so we know from this inscription, and this is a similar case, and there are a few others, that above ground of the Praetextatus catacombs, there were people buried who belonged to the imperial household as chef cooks, as head cooks, and as we can see in the galleries below, there seem to have been buried the line cooks, so the ordinary cooks, because there are in these galleries some graffiti that was scratched into the wet plaster once the walls were plastered, which says, of the cooks 11, of the cooks 6, of the cooks 30. And these numbers probably will refer to the number of the decurio, of this sub-organization of the organization of the cooks. And even in the 4th century, there is a late inscription that was attached to another gallery of the same system that belonged to a milkman of the imperial household at the Lateran. So we get an impression that this whole area here, this whole part of the catacomb of Praetextatus was actually used for imperial staff, and in particular the staff that was involved in the catering business, in the feeding of the imperial household. We could also discuss, but maybe we don't do that now, the way that the parts are organized here, and we can compare the population of living represented in these smaller catacombs, the Christian ones, in comparison to Praetextatus. And we end up, or also we can compare the areas covered by Praetextatus and the smaller, certainly Christian ones, to eventually conclude that probably, especially the very large catacombs, were founded by the emperor or by the imperial administration to bury imperial staff, imperial slaves and freed people, maybe also a few other people that we don't know very well. And so what we are seeing here in the 3rd century is a return to collective burials that we already know from the very beginnings of the Roman Empire under Augustus, where they also built underground tombs for staff, which we call columbaria, because you have these little niches as if they were for doves, dovecotes, where the urns with the ashes of the deceased were set up here in these floors. So enormous buildings. This one had about 3,000 burials, which is approximately the same number of people as could be buried in all these hypogaea in the plot of land, which probably also in this case belonged to the emperor. So I hope you can see from this example how archaeological work is really detective work that can contribute substantially to a better understanding of ancient society. You need to look very carefully at the evidence. You need to compare different types of evidence and not compartmentalize too much. You know, the inscriptions are for the epigraphists, and the Christian stuff is for the Christian archaeologies of the Pontificio Commissione, no? But that if you bring everything together, as it was in the ancient world in reality, where all these things formed the material environment in which people lived and through which they expressed their ideas, then it can be a fascinating way of gaining a better understanding of the ancient society. So that's my approach anyway to archaeology, and I'd be happy to answer questions anche in italiano. Se volete chiedere in italiano, per me andrebbe molto bene.
Ok, ma posso fare la domanda? Mi sente?
Qua. Ecco,
okay,
sì.
Bene. Ma sappiamo perché si sceglie di cominciare a seppellire nelle catacombe piuttosto che in superficie? Abbiamo delle fonti che ci dicono che c'è un'esigenza di cimiteri che in superficie non si può soddisfare perché ci sono troppi edifici o...
Non posso sentire.
Abbiamo delle fonti che ci dicono che c'è un'esigenza particolare di cimiteri. Perché si sceglie di seppellire in catacombe sottoterra piuttosto che in dei cimiteri all'aperto? C'era una tradizione particolare? Per quale motivo?
Chiedere il motivo perché hanno stabilito questi cimiteri sottoterra?
Sì, se sappiamo perché
Sì.
si preferiva...
Non abbiamo le fonti, non abbiamo nulla scritto, niente, assolutamente niente. Non lo sappiamo perché l'abbiamo fatto. Ma probabilmente possiamo speculare un po', possiamo pensare delle circostanze in questo periodo. Una cosa è che lo spazio per creare le tombe è stato limitato, ovviamente, anche se Roma è stata una metropoli di forse 700.000 o anche 1 milione di abitanti, una città enorme per l'antichità. Ovviamente c'erano tantissimi morti ogni anno e possiamo mappare queste tombe cronologicamente e vediamo che con tempo le tombe sono state stabilite sempre più lontano da Roma. Ovviamente per visitare le tombe della famiglia, per gli abitanti di Roma è stata sempre più difficile e, come si dice, time consuming di fare un viaggio alle tombe dei defunti, dei loro defunti. E quindi queste catacombe sono, come abbiamo visto nel primo slide, sono tutti i più lontani, sono circa al 3° miglio, che è ancora una distanza accettabile. E quindi la vicinanza, trovare spazio per seppellimento più vicino a Roma probabilmente è stato un aspetto positivo. Un altro forse è stata anche la cosiddetta crisi del III secolo, con vari problemi sociali ma anche finanziari. E quindi sembra che in particolare i liberti, quindi questo strato medio della società che erano schiavi ma poi lasciati liberi, questo strato medio della società che hanno edificato la maggioranza delle tombe che noi vediamo nelle città nei dintorni di Roma, sembra che loro in particolare non avevano ancora i fondi per costruire, per comprare lo spazio per la tomba, perché questo è il primo obiettivo, di comprare lo spazio per una tomba e poi edificare una tomba. E quindi probabilmente questi due sono due aspetti rilevanti a questo sviluppo, ma non abbiamo niente scritto.
Va bene, grazie.
Ci sono altre domande?
Ci può fare per favore un esempio di come si svolge un suo seminario?
Come si svolge che cosa?
Un suo seminario, ad esempio riguardo al corso che ha fatto quest'anno.
Il mio corso?
La parte di seminario.
Ah, ok. Per i seminari faccio due seminari diversi, uno per gli studenti del corso ordinario e un altro per gli studenti, gli allievi del corso PhD, del dottorato, perché ovviamente ci sono sono le conoscenze un po' diverse e per me è molto importante che parlano tutti, contribuiscono tutti al seminario. E quindi di solito faccio due cose in alternativa. O presento io un caso particolarmente interessante e noi discutiamo insieme come approcciare un'interpretazione di questo oggetto, per esempio una tomba un po' speciale che è un po' diverso delle tombe dei tipi molto ben conosciuto. Oppure chiedo ai partecipanti di leggere un articolo o un capitolo, diciamo tra 15 e 25 pagine, su un certo tema. E poi io porto un PowerPoint con le immagini e poi discutiamo questo articolo o questo contributo e scelgo un contributo che parla di una metodologia, un certo approccio metodologico. Noi nel seminario facciamo una valutazione dell'argomento e pensiamo di come si può applicare queste metodologie. E c'è anche, scusami, una parte dei seminari è anche consiste anche delle presentazioni dei studenti perché il loro voto ricevano sulla base di una presentazione con PowerPoint seminariale di 25 minuti circa e poi una discussione in tutto il seminario della presentazione, delle domande su cui si può pensare in varie direzioni diversi. Quindi sono quasi tre modi diversi o tre tipi diversi di seminari, ma tutti hanno questo elemento essenziale di stimolare una discussione metodologica e delle cose con una partecipazione di tutti gli studenti.
Grazie.
Durante il corso le capita mai di portare gli studenti sui luoghi che si stanno studiando?
Qualche volta sì, non possiamo farlo ogni anno, anche perché ci sono altri colleghi che fanno i loro seminari e corsi e vogliono portare studenti in altre parti, ma per esempio l'anno scorso ho fatto una missione didattica a Roma e abbiamo visitato vari luoghi anche con permessi speciali della soprintendenza per ottenere il permesso di accedere i siti, i monumenti che di solito non sono chiusi al pubblico e quindi una bella possibilità per vedere il materiale direttamente. Quest'anno il mio collega, professor Radonato, fa una missione ad Atene con il suo corso e quindi io ho portato i miei studenti del corso sulle tombe al Camposanto di Pisa, dove c'è una grandissima collezione di sarcofagi romani che i pisani del Medioevo hanno portato a Pisa perché volevano presentarli come i secondi romani, no? E quindi questa collezione abbiamo studiato direttamente perché si può avvicinare molto, molto vicino al materiale e quindi proviamo sempre di includere un aspetto di diretto confronto, diretto al materiale che studiamo. L'anno prossimo faccio un corso sull'urbanistica e questo è legato in un certo modo a un grande progetto di ricerca che attualmente ho alla scuola finanziato da un ERC grant e abbiamo creato varie metodologie, anche tecniche, un sistema digitale di studiare la topografia di Roma antica e in questo seminario in questi seminari l'anno prossimo vorrei integrare anche un aspetto pratico dove i studenti possono usare le nostre risorse per un piccolo progetto di ricerca.
Grazie.
Ci sono altre domande? Ok, altrimenti ringraziamo ancora la professoressa Borg.